everybody. Thank you for tuning in to PVD Horror. We are joined here today with Justin P. Lange, who directed this new film, The Visitor, which we enjoyed thoroughly, and we are going to get right into talking about. But first, let's get a little background on Justin. Brandon, you want to take us off?
Yeah. So, Justin, we all have this fun, crazy story on how we were introduced to the horror genre. Can you share your first experience of viewing a horror film?
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, I actually got into horror pretty late because I was a big wuss growing up. I grew up in kind of a stricter household, so we didn't really watch a lot of TV or movies that much. But I think the first horror film I ever actually saw was at a friend's house.
Okay.
And it was Friday the 13th, and it scared the living shit out of me. Sorry, am I allowed to curse?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to say.
And and I had trouble sleeping, and just was probably having all the Catholic guilt that I had being brought up that way. I was also like scared that I would get in trouble for watching it. But yeah, I mean, I had a very sort of active imagination, and I didn't really like being scared, and so I sort of, I think, closed that chapter off a bit for me. And then it wasn't until probably film school that a friend of mine had suggested that I watch the movie Let the Right One In.
Okay.
And so that movie became sort of a gateway for me into horror. I watched it, I thought it was beautiful and scary all at the same time, and it was sort of like, oh wait, I'm not completely not allowed in this world, or I don't have I can't have a part in this genre. But I still was intimidated by it. So it really wasn't until my last directing class in film school that I was sort of pushed into horror as a filmmaker anyway. Not.
Okay. That's a cool little story. So now you're not known just for making films. This is a little thing that I found online, but now is it true that you only wear red shoes? Like I need to know like the whole backstory about that. Like how did this happen?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Much to my girlfriend's chagrin. No, I'm just kidding. How did it start? Yeah, I mean, it was sort of around the time. So I was in my early, I think I was like late teens, early 20s. I just sort of dropped out of the first college I attended, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had gone to undergrad initially to be in politics. And so I went to school in DC, and I just got really disillusioned with it, and that's when I wrote my first script. And I had submitted it to this Project Greenlight thing, and it ended up getting kind of far into that. And so then I was like, oh, like this is something I can do. I like this. And so I ended up dropping out of school and moving back, Northeast. And at that time, I guess I was going through a lot of changes where I just done this huge shift in what I wanted to do with my life, and left all my friends and left school, and sort of never really considered myself an artist in any way, shape, or form, and suddenly that was the thing I was going to pursue. And I think and then around that same time, my grandmother passed away, who I was very, very close with. And so I think there was just sort of some soul searching going on or something. And I went, I just, I was one of those guys that wore one pair of shoes until they died, and then I would wear another pair. And so I went shoe shopping with my younger sister, and she picked out these red Adidas sneakers, and I would check the price, and they were like $30. I was like, great. And I started wearing them, and it was sort of like I'd always liked red and the color, and it had always been my favorite color. And it was sort of subconscious, you know, I'm very close with my sister, and so it's sort of special that she initiated it. But it wasn't really, I didn't realize it was a thing until I went to buy my next pair of shoes, and I was like, I think I'm gonna, you know, it sort of, I had identified with it. It sort of became something. And then you know, when I ended up finally graduating from college and start to try to work in film, I wasn't sure if I'd get a job, and I sort of made this pact with myself that I would only take a job, because I was nervous that I wouldn't be able to get a job in film. But at that point, I considered myself a creative, and I'd sort of found my niche in the world, I thought. And so I said, you know, I need to find a job, but it can only be a job that'll allow me to wear red shoes every day. And in that way, it sort of kept me, you know, I figured only a creative place would let me do that. Yeah. Luckily, I did end up getting a job in film, and I sort of ran an indie film company for a few years, and so during that time, I could wear whatever I wanted, and it just became a thing. And I've been wearing red shoes for 20 years now.
Oh man,
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, Josh doesn't like to wear shoes.
I gotta tell you, before the next question, for the first time ever, I got blue shoes. I have to get specially made shoes, and I only get white shoes because they're the only ones that I could get. And this year, finally, I got blue shoes. Ask these guys. Every day, I was like, "Hey guys, I got blue shoes." It was amazing. I'm so happy I got blue shoes, and now I ripped through the side of them, so I need blue shoes.
There really is.
You gotta get more blue shoes.
There really is only two jobs you can get with red shoes. It's like a creative job or Ronald McDonald.
Yeah.
I think you made the right choice.
Yeah, I do have a pair of boots that I love that are really invoke the Ronald McDonald. But I don't care. I love them, so I wear them anyway. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a weird thing. And at this point, like my nieces and nephew just love it. You know, they're always, every time they see me, the first thing they do is look down. Yeah. You know, there's yeah, I have tons of stories from the red shoes that just sort of, you know, have accumulated throughout the years. But other people seem to enjoy it more than I do at this point. So
you have your own red shoes diaries. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. I don't want to disappoint anyone by giving up at this point. So
it should be a next film, just about red shoes, killer with red shoes or something like that, you know? So, you know, with 3 horror films under your belt, such as The Dark and The Seventh Day, and now The Visitor, what inspired you to create these projects?
Well, they're really pretty disparate, you know, different projects. The Dark, you know, I guess just going in order, The Dark, the genesis of that was, like I said, was sort of my entryway into horror. As I said, you know, I'd gotten into Let the Right One In, and then, but you know, even with having seen that film, through the first basically 2 years of film school, I really considered myself a very sort of serious, you know, I took myself very seriously. I sort of was trying to make European aesthetic drama films that were sort of, I don't know if they were bad or good, but they were sort of alienating. And I think people were like, yeah, you know, my classmates were like, I think it's good. I don't really know what it is or what it means. And so it wasn't until I went into my last directing class. I went to Columbia graduate film program. And I had this class with this teacher, directing teacher, Eric Mendelson. And he's sort of a big personality and a really, really interesting teacher. And he, at the beginning of the semester, he watched everybody's body of work or whatever, the shorts and directing exercises we'd made throughout our time. And so the first day we came into class and he went around to everybody and he just went to me and he said, look, man, I don't know what this thing is that you're doing, you know, but blow it up. He's like, do the furthest thing from what your instincts would tell you to do. And I was like, ouch, okay. but I, sort of embraced it. A lot of people really respected him respect him as a teacher. I'm sure. I think he's still there. And so for me at that time, it was horror. So I went off and I did this little, 3-minute exercise for my first exercise for that class, and it was a horror thing. And or my version of a horror thing anyway, because I didn't have a lot to go on. And I brought it into class, and everybody just erupted about it. Like, it was just like the most visceral reaction I'd ever had to something I'd made. And I was just like, whoa, wait, wow, that's the relationship with the audience that you want. You don't want to stiff arm them, you want to bring them in, and so I was hooked. I just said, oh my God, So then the next step was, do I just do a deep dive into horror, or do I just sort of continue to see what my version of horror is? Luckily I didn't. My choice was to not do the deep dive. But I think there was sort of a middle ground, because that class was very intensive and we would spend hours and hours. He would take movies and he'd break them down shot by shot. And we'd be sitting there for 5 hours, breaking a movie down. And during that class, he taught, we looked at Rosemary's Baby, we looked at Jaws, we looked at Poltergeist. Okay. Some of these movies that became some of my favorite films, just in the sense of being able to see how they were made. And I think that also allowed me to feel more comfortable in the genre, just to see sort of, how it's made, and get behind the scenes, and it made it slightly less terrifying for me. And so I set out to make my thesis film was a sort of horror film, and it was a short version. It was more of a sketch of the dark. I ultimately just said, with my thesis film, I'm going to continue to explore, dip my toe into this genre, and see if any of these ideas work. And so I made sort of a monster movie short, where the girl is a monster and the boy has his eyes sewn shut. And it's sort of fantastical and weird. And if you look in the girl's eyes, the monster, your insides sort of explode and you start bleeding out from all your orifices. But the boy can't see her, so he's safe. And so I made this little 16, 17-minute short, and I ended up getting in a lot of festivals, including the Rhode Island Festival. And so that gave me, the success of that short gave me the confidence to kind of continue forward and say, okay, maybe I can do that. Let's try more. And so, with the short, I similarly didn't have a score. It was very quiet. And that was influenced by No Country for Old Men. And I was interested in exploring that further with the feature. So I wrote the feature. It took a really long time to develop it. I worked with my best friend who ended up producing the feature. He's Austrian, and he lives in Vienna. So I ended up moving to Vienna and living in Vienna for 3 years. Okay. The film itself is technically Austrian. It was financed in Austria. And partially we got a grant in Canada where we ended up shooting. It was a really long road to get it made. I mean, my friend who's Austrian, and then the DP who I ended up working with, and a bunch of the crew who were my friends from Austria, we all really wanted to make the feature together. And that's sort of difficult because of the setup of the funding system over there. Then it's not really set up for American filmmakers, but we sort of were really determined to do it, and we found a way. A lot of thanks go to Robert Eggers, who coincidentally I had met through a mutual friend. We were both in the wedding party. He was the best man and I was a groomsman, and this was before he was trying to make The Witch and I was trying to make The Dark, and he ended up Making the Witch and a few other movies you may have heard of. And so, but this was, I think this was before The Lighthouse, but it was after The Witch. And he had shot The Witch in Canada using the same tax incentive, no, sorry, not tax incentive, grants.
Okay.
And so he sort of, shed light on that and sort of gave me some insight and some advice, and that really, had we not had that conversation, had he not sort of pointed me in that direction, I'm not sure we ever make the film, to be honest. Because that amount of funding really put us over the top, because the script itself is pretty small, but it's like my good Italian filmmaker friend said when he read the script, he goes, "Man, you wrote every production challenge you could possibly write into your first feature." With dealing with child actors and dealing with prosthetics, where I mean almost every frame of the film is these kids, and they had extensive prosthetics, makeup, that was taking 3 hours to put on in the morning and 2.5 hours to take off at night. And so, and the movie sort of lives or dies on that makeup working.
Yeah.
So you really needed, we needed to work with a reputable, good company, which we did with Masters FX. Yeah, so it was just, there was, but that was an exciting time, and I love that film. I mean, it warts and all, I'm very proud of it. It's really sort of whatever was in my head sort of ended up on screen, and it really, and it was different, it's, I know some people get pissed off because it's not true horror or something. I don't know. I think it's pretty horrific. But I wanted to tell a story about abuse, and I wanted to be true to that experience as much as I could, even if it meant sometimes making decisions. I think going into that film, I talked with everyone. I just said, look, the North Star is these kids, and we got to represent these kids, and we got to tell their stories. And even if it's hard, that's our mission.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and that film, it went to a lot of festivals and got distributed, and sort of gave me my foot in the door.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I don't know, am I just rambling? Should I?
Well, I was just gonna say, like, I love this idea of what horror is, right?
Yeah.
And I think it really is like in the eye of the beholder, right? So it's kind of what you find to be horror. And I love that you're just going in your direction rather than trying to find this like cookie cutter formula, which we're all tired of. And people are saying actively that they're tired of, but people are so contradicting, because one minute they'll say, "Oh, there's no original horror," then someone does an original horror, then they're complaining that that's not horror. Come on.
Yeah.
But I also love that you find horror even in, like, you gained influence from No Country for Old Men, which is not horror, but it's kind of chilling. That's a chilling movie. Like, there are scenes there that are
I maintain that's a horror film.
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
everybody says it's not, and I know they didn't intend it to be. I was physically angry at the end of that movie that those filmmakers made me feel the way I felt. I mean, it was so affecting, and part of the reason why, from my perspective, was the lack of music. They were not going to tell us how to feel. They were not going to give us that easy way out of being, like that. It was going to be on us to sort of figure out how we felt about the things we were watching, and they weren't going to guide our hands. And it was so affecting to me, and it wasn't for the same reason with The Dark, but I think I knew that The Dark was going to be a tightrope to walk, given the main character and the things she does. In that film, we sort of were always saying everybody's a monster and nobody's a monster. And as we went through it, and just sort of trying to find that balance of allowing the audience in to find some empathy with this girl, but also witness the things that she does. So yeah, I mean, that film, I thought No Country was incredibly it was really affecting to me.
That's one of my favorite movies. When I first seen that movie, I was like, holy shit. Like I had to watch it a few times. I'm like, oh man, and it still holds up, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, it's really, and it took me a while, you know, to, it's weird with me. Sometimes the movies that affect me the most, like that I love the most, sometimes I can't go back and watch them because of what they made me feel. I mean, 28 Days Later was a film that I saw in
Yep.
the theaters and scared the living shit out of me.
Yes. Yeah.
And I have the DVD. Like, I know nobody does DVDs anymore, but you know, at the time, like it came out, the minute it came out, I bought it. I have never once watched that DVD. I have it, and it's just like there's never a moment where it's like, oh, you know what, I want to feel the thing that I
Yeah.
felt in that theater,
Yeah.
you know, when I watched that movie. It's just like it's yeah, it's a struggle with me. I am a fearful person. And so it's weird that I ended up, you know, in horror, but because I still struggle watching horror.
So your story just really explains something to me, and I think it also explains why you do horror. Watching The Visitor, which we're going to get to in a little bit, but like watching The Visitor, one of the things that struck me, and I really appreciate it, was the atmosphere you build and the feel of the film. Like I felt caught up in that feeling, and you're kind of describing like your influences are kind of like the feeling you get from a film, so it makes sense that you make films that like send like a strong feeling, like a sense of in The Visitor a lot of the time is like a sense of like something's off, right?
Mhm.
And I felt that the entire time, and it made me just want to like be very curious throughout the whole film. So kind of like going into The Visitor a little bit, I wanted to give you an opportunity to give our listeners a summary of that, what that film's about. And just for people listening, this is going to be out on October 7th on digital on demand, I believe. And then it'll be out on Epix in December.
Mhm.
Get that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So it comes out on Friday on digital on demand, and then yeah, December on Epix. And then yeah, I think that's the deal. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, so this is the first film that I didn't write, that I've directed, which was exciting for me. It's really always something that I've wanted to do because I kind of consider myself a director first. And, you know, one of the things that you know, it's sort of like, I always say, I mentioned Poltergeist, for instance, or like The Thing, you know, these are two of my favorite horror films that I watch, and I'm like, God, I wish I directed this, you know, but there's no way I would write either of those movies. It doesn't mean that I don't, you know, I actually love them and I love what, you know, but it's just not sort of what I would write. And, you know, but that doesn't mean that I don't love them and I couldn't direct them. So I really, you know, wanted to open that door at some point, and start exploring other people's minds and things that come to their minds. And so this is the first opportunity for that, and which was very exciting. And you know, it's a story about this couple, Robert and Maya. They move from London, where they were living, to Maya's hometown, which is sort of general small town, you know, not anything specific. But they moved to her childhood home because her father has recently passed away. And as they're moving in, Robert goes up to the attic and he finds a painting of himself, basically, or someone that looks exactly like him. And he, you know, it's like an earworm that he can't let it go, and he sort of tumbles down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out who this guy is in this painting that looks exactly like him. And you know, the truths that he uncovers are probably much bigger and more severe than anything he anticipated in the beginning. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of the long and short of it.
Nice. So now this film is part of the Blumhouse Television Epix deal that was announced back in 2021 to develop and produce like 8 horror movies exclusively for the network. How does it feel to have your film in such a powerhouse deal like this, and how did you get involved with that?
Well, I mean, it feels great. Anytime as a horror director, I think that you kind of get approached by a company like Blumhouse, or you get the opportunity to work with Blumhouse. That's pretty exciting. And it's something, that's really, that you really have to think hard about and want to do. So that said, I mean, they had seen my previous work, and also the writers, we share managers, and so I think specifically Adam Mason had seen The Dark and really liked it. And so I think he suggested me or put me up, for this, and said, I really think he'd be good. And so we started having discussions. I read the script, I talked a bunch with Blumhouse, and we ended up thinking it was a good fit. And so, it was really exciting, and it was a wild ride. It moved very fast. Going from the indie world where sort of, it's this pushing a boulder up a hill sort of thing, with The Dark, I think it took me 6 years to get that movie made. And then with this, it was like, I think I got the job on like a Thursday, and I was home packing and off to New Orleans, like a week later, in prep. So it was much faster. But it was great.
That's pretty badass, man.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it was very exciting. And it was this was probably, not that these were enormous budgets, and they were different sort of setups. So they're doing 8 films, but they're all standalone films. They're not related to each other. So, but we're using similar crews and things like that. There's a lot of carryover in that sense. So it's sort of a hybrid film TV model in a way. But just in the sense that it moves really fast, and you're not necessarily as a director picking all your department heads or anything like that. Like you're kind of coming into a well-oiled machine, and going from there. But that said, there's a ton of support and creative freedom, and that Blumhouse, was allowing and encouraging. And then we had enough of a budget that it, really let me flex some sort of creative muscles that I hadn't been able to in the past, and sort of explore and try new things in ways that I hadn't in the past. So there are some sequences in this film that I love and had a lot of fun creating.
I'm gonna get to those. I gotta tell you. So my wife doesn't like horror, so when I watch a horror movie, she does not want to see it. But she was coming in and out, and I'm like, oh, and I would pause and be like, what just happened? So, and I was like going into it, and she's like, yep, and I was like, when you get lost in a movie and you just get so excited, I was literally like coming up off the couch, and I'm like, no, this is the big like reveal, like this is insane. And some of the shots were beautiful, so kudos to you, man.
Oh, thank you.
It's Josh's anniversary, so he wanted to give a shout out to his wife right there.
Yeah,
happy anniversary.
She's still
Happy
working.
anniversary.
Yeah, 13 sometimes happy years. Yeah, you're married. You probably get it. It's our anniversary, and we both had things to do today, so we'll celebrate at a later time.
We don't need
That's
to
how
know.
it works.
Josh. We don't need to know.
Yeah. If she's listening, I love you. She doesn't listen to the podcast at all.
Of course not.
So I got a question. How was it working with Finn Jones and Jessica Mcnee on the film? Like, they're pretty well-known actresses.
Yeah. Well, it was great. I mean, I had worked. I've had experience, but I mean, ultimately, you're working with it. It doesn't really matter that much about whether they're known or what they've done before. It's just as long as they come prepared, for the thing at hand. And And you know, Finn, I had spoken to prior to filming when we were just, you know, deciding whether it was something for him, and we had a long discussion, and he really liked the project and had ideas, and we, you know, we realized, I think it was important to both of us that we had a form of communication that was symbiotic, you know, that we could be honest and open with each other, and I thought we both felt that, you know, it was a good fit, and we wanted to make you know, the same movie. So that was exciting, and similarly with Jess, you know, I think for me it was important, you know, I think from really the first time, or as we were, I think maybe it was the first round of notes, we were kind of going through the script, and it just sort of, I think we were on a Zoom call or something, and just suddenly, like, the reality of Maya's character hit me.
Mm.
And I was just like, this is a really interesting story. Like her backstory and what she's gone through, and I just really started to empathize with that character in a way that I said, you know, and it was important to Jess too when we first spoke, that this not just be a character that is sort of there in service of Robert, you know, like she needed to have a voice, and she needed to have a say in sort of the proceedings and what she'd gone through. Because, you know, I think they're both sort of kind of tragic characters in a way. And so, you know, having somebody that was on board with that, and then having two actors that, you know, in the lead roles that, you know, ultimately I think I pushed the movie a bit more in the direction of a two-hander. You know, keeping track of that, and being a team to work and make that work, was really important. So yeah, I mean, I was thrilled to be able to work with both of them. They had a really great chemistry from day one. You know, we went to dinner when they both arrived, and they both took an Uber together to dinner, and they showed up cracking up, and I guess they had just, the Uber driver had let one of them put their iPhone on, and they were just blaring music and singing at the top of their lungs through New Orleans all the way to dinner. And they had met like 5 seconds before. So yeah, so it was, you know, it was a really good pairing.
Nice.
Yeah, you could see it on film too. So that's cool.
Yeah.
I'm
So
glad, yeah.
yeah. So Simon Boyes and Adam Mason were the writers of this film, and they also wrote films such as Songbird, Broken, Blood River, and The Devil's Chair. You stated after finishing your first reading of The Visitor, you were left with a question lingering in your mind, one that haunted you for a while, for years. You said that played much control. Like, you know, like you said, does the person have so much control? How much control does a person have over themselves, of who they become? Did you ever find that answer?
No, I think that I'm not sure I'll ever find that answer.
Uh,
Yeah, look, I mean, it's like I said, in a way, you know, when you're deciding whether a project's right for you, and whether, you know, it's obviously you want the script to be good, you want to sort of be excited by some visuals or some influences or things like that, but really, you know, I think what takes a movie from just being sort of a competent thing or whatever, or you know, or a breezy watch, is if you as a director can say that you have a perspective on the proceedings, you know, and like something you can add. And for me, I think it's like I said, you know, the Maya and Robert characters for me felt a bit tragic. And you know, looking at my first film and what it deals with, and you know, I definitely in my work have explored whether it be cycles of abuse or family dynamics, or you know, this idea of sort of, are we formed by our environment before we really have a say on who we want to be? And you know, and there are ideologies and systems of power and oppression that are around us at all, you know, and we're born into that context. And you know, to if you're not sort of aware of it or constantly sort of, thinking critically about it, then it can sort of form you. And I think maybe, even on a personal, that's how abuse becomes a cycle, is the basically, speaking generally, in maybe horror terms or something, the power of evil is fleeting as long as nobody, makes the conscious decision to take up the mantle. It's up to us to, it can end at a certain point, but we have to make that decision and make that choice. Somebody, each of us has to, sort of, in a way, and so it's like I think it's interesting with this movie in a way that, like, Margaret and Kathy and Maxwell Braun are sort of the heroes of the story, and they're the ones putting it all on the line, trying to subvert or change the trajectory of this, evil ideology or whatever that that's unfolding, and the ones who really have control over it, which are Robert and Maya, that these are two characters that are sort of, they have the power and the privilege to sort of do something different and make a change. And what makes them tragic is that they both sort of fall in line, and they're presented with ways out, and they instead choose to honor this legacy, and they sort of succumb to their legacy. And so that's, for me, that's sort of tragic. And it's a tragedy of them, it's a tragedy of a lot of people, a tragedy of the world, maybe. And not to get too, high-minded, it's still a fun horror movie. But I guess that's why I end up finding horror as being like a good
metaphor, right?
Vehicle for me as a filmmaker, is because I think I tend to sort of veer more towards, like, I'm like emotional and maybe a little cerebral and pretty earnest, and so that the sort of darkness and the things, the things that horror, the elements that horror can kind of add, it's like these two things colliding. It sort of makes them, they're interesting bedfellows, whereas if I'm just one, then it's just earnest and sort of cheesy, like, and nobody wants to hear me preach. But the horror kind of makes the pill go down, I think. So yeah, I mean, who knows if that all comes through, but that's sort of those are the themes of the things that I was seeing in the film. And yeah, like I guess that was from that statement I'd written. It's just that that is, when you're making a horror film, it's like I'm looking at it, I'm like, where's the fear? What am I afraid of? Here. And that idea does haunt me. Sort of, I'm a control freak. I'm a director, it sort of scares the hell out of me that I am not, micromanaging who I am and who I become, and that I'm affected by these outside things, that I'm affected by things that have happened to me in the past, and that they formed me as I am now, and what does that mean?
Think about this though. Earlier you had mentioned how when you were in film school, like, you have all these ideas, you have and inherently you kind of want control, but then, like, your teacher comes up to you and it says, just do the exact opposite of whatever your instinct is telling you, and you right there have that choice. Do I do what I know and what's comfortable and I feel like I have control over, or do I take a chance and make this totally different project that goes against everything I know? And you decided, I'm going to take that guy's advice and I'm going to follow that, and then here you are today. So I think when we look at, like, we all have these backgrounds and these things that happen, and we can't control that piece of it, but what we can control is some of the choices we make. And
exactly. Yeah.
And I think that inherent, like, ends up becoming, like, bringing us to where we become,
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is, I think if I write this movie, I maybe have I maybe am sort of, there's something in me that maybe pushes them to do the right thing or something, like and so it was interesting to do something that was, that was in the script that, maybe wasn't narratively what I sort of wanted to happen, but at the same time it felt dark and it felt really tragic in a way that was interesting to me and maybe more effective
Yeah.
than maybe what I would have done, what my instincts would have gone. But yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I'm making it sound like this really, really heavy film, which it's really not. But I mean, that's sort of the thing, it's like when you watch Rosemary's Baby, you watch The Wicker Man, they're, and what I also find interesting about those films that I sort of was interested with this film as well is tonally, that they're both really off kilter and weird and sometimes kind of funny, and you don't remember these films as funny at all. But there's like that scene in Rosemary's Baby where Rosemary's on the phone and the people in the building we're in this like wide shot and they're just like creeping by the doorway behind her, and it's like, it's very much shot like a comedy, like with the sort of what's it called, dramatic irony or whatever, and so and the cast of it are these big characters in that film, and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting that these films are held up as these terrifying movies, but tonally they're kind of not super oppressive,
The were there any like problems going in, like knowing that you're not the writer but you're the director? Were there any issues like right off the bat where you were like, oh, I can't do this?
No, not really. I mean, and that's not really a testament to me as much as it is to both Blumhouse and then also Adam and Simon, to Blumhouse being open to creative freedom and ideas, and then Adam and Simon sort of being generous artists, who kind of understood that everybody sort of wants to make the best film and the best version of this film as possible. And so and then I felt the responsibility to make, again, the best version of the film they wrote. So there was no loggerheads or anything. This was really it was really a pretty copacetic experience.
That's pretty awesome. There were also, so you spoke earlier of this, there were some really unique shots in this. One of them was where the guy falls down, and it was just shot really beautifully, and I was like, oh wow, that's really something. And I just wanted your feeling on like, what's your feeling on making those kind of shots, because they're really out of the box shots. And also, is it hard to direct shots like that where they're just unique, just in camera angles and things like that, and actor performances?
It's really the most fun. It's why I fell in love with directing once, and I was really in that class where we would watch these movies shot by shot, and there was a really interesting exercise I remember that teacher did, where he went around the room and he had a shot that was on screen, and he was like, what does this shot feel like? And everybody would get all analytical and say, oh well, he's thinking this, and he was like, no, that's not a feeling. And he was like, what does this shot feel like? And going around the room, and it just took a really long time for someone to for us to start to talk, for our vocabulary for shots to start being feelings, which they really are and should be. That's what sort of drives the visual language. And so with each film, that's really, I storyboard everything, and it's really because I don't really believe in wasted shots. I think every shot should mean something and have a reason to be there. And luckily, when I worked with Fede Verardi, who's my DP on this film, when we first met, it was just like we were both like, yeah, we both sort of share that that idea. And so there wasn't a lot of, two camera shooting, type of situations. There was some in this movie, but just for time and stuff. But for everything, everything needed to be intentional. We wanted everything to be specific because it didn't just happen that way. This was all designed. So, with those shots, it's about it's evoking a feeling, but there's also an element of what I was able to do, maybe, knowing that I had a bit of a broader palette or whatever, maybe some more toys to play with, it enabled me to do some things that maybe I hadn't in the past. But it's all really, about subjectivity of characters. And, I think you're talking about the shot where Finn falls backwards in the bar.
Well, that was just an example, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was a fun shot. It was something that occurred to me, and it was just sort of, just at the point of the movie, it gave us a feeling of sort of, his headspace and where he is. And, it's really feels like we're sort of falling into something. And that's the beginning of that starting to shift. I mean, there are different shots. There's a fun shot that I really love that's sort of rotating down, as in the ceremony at the end, where the shot's just sort of rotating down onto Finn's face, and it feels like we're somehow descending into his brain. For me anyway, like that's it. And then we jump into his subconscious. Things like that were really fun to work with. Expressive camera that's what I find that, you see that a lot more in horror than, it's probably, that's why it's so fun to direct, is it's so manipulative, and it's a really active, medium of directing. Whereas maybe some others are more about, stepping back. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of room to have fun and explore. But I honestly, I think maybe my favorite scene is the dinner table scene, where they're just, because it's, I guess for me, it's like those are the hardest scenes to direct in a way, because how do you make that interesting? Two people sitting at a table, and to really sort of choose shots that are expressive, but not over the top, that says this is more than what it is, which is actually two people at a table. So you maybe see, at the beginning of that scene, it's subtle, but it's just, there's a shot of Finn which feels like he's a bit smaller in frame, and he's sort of normalized in the frame. And then her shot is low angle, so she kind of feels more domineering in the frame. And these are just over the shoulder shots, they're not, but it's important, I think, as a director, to remember that nothing's just an over the shoulder shot. If it's just that, then don't do it. Think about what is there a way to make this shot more expressive and say something with it, that is pertinent to the scene, and gives the viewer a feeling. And nobody's saying, oh, this shot's low angle, she must be really, powerful, but it just feels different, and it just kind of makes you feel like,
I think it's subliminal. Like some of the
exactly.
Just a message through the angle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's the idea. You were talking about sort of having this sort of oppressive feeling or something, feeling like things are off. Like camera can do that, and it doesn't. And it doesn't necessarily. You might not know that it's doing it. And it shouldn't. It should be subtle, but I mean, but the angles that you choose can make you feel, ooh, something's weird about this.
Yeah. So, Justin, I'm going to ask you this question. Let's say you're the main character in this film, okay? how long do you stay in this town with your wife? Like, do you see it through? Are you curious and you're going to get to the bottom of this, or do you see that painting in the attic and you get the hell out?
Oh man, I mean, well, sadly, I have to say I'm probably the guy that does stay or stick around. I'm such like a pleaser. Like if she wants to be there, I'm probably gonna do as much as I can to I did sort of see a little bit of myself in Robert in the beginning, where he's just a normal guy who just sort of wants to be a good partner and and make everybody happy in a sort of way. And yeah, so but I don't know, I mean, the painting would be a little freaky for sure, but I'm not sure I would have ever found the painting. I'd have that nightmare, and be going to a creepy attic. I don't go into creepy attics. I don't go into basements or attics, no thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure they would have had to tie me up and put me up there to find that painting, but yeah, it's the town is kind of fun. It's weird. I had somebody ask me recently in one of the interviews, they said, did you change your perspective on small towns? Like almost like I had a vendetta against small towns. And I was like, I got no problem with small towns. I live in a small town. I live in the mountains of California, like my parents grew up in a very small town in upstate New York. So I certainly have no problem with small towns.
Yeah. Well, Justin, this film, The Visitor, was really creepy, really compelling. I found myself the whole time kind of wanting to know where this is going to go. So and you just created such an excellent atmosphere and vibe in this movie.
Thank you.
Really well done. And
yeah, it made me really mad. At the end of it, I was like yelling at the TV in my classic style.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. I hate to say it, a lot of films in the genre don't make you feel, and this one did. So
that's good to hear.
Yeah, it says a lot.
Good to hear. I'm glad.
Yeah, so we're just happy that you had taken your teacher's advice and just left field with everything, and
thank Eric Mendelsohn.
Yeah, so
thank you.
Congratulations. As soon as this is over, you'll be writing a thank you letter.
I think Justin, such a great lesson for people though is sometimes you do have to just kind of go with what your gut's telling you, and sometimes that's to get away from the comfort zone or from what you normally would do. So you can't really explore everything if you just always do only what you know. So I think that's a great
Yep.
So everybody make sure you check out The Visitor October 7th on digital and on demand, and then in December on Epix if you're going to wait for it to come on there. Justin, do you have anything coming on next, and do you want to tell people where else they can find you on social media or anything?
Oh God, I'm such a Luddite. I have Instagram, and that's it. So I think people can find me there. It's JP_Lange. I don't have anything imminent. I'm working on a bunch of projects that we're trying to get up and running. Not everything goes in a week, but I just adapted a horror limited series that I did a pilot for that we're trying to get up and going that I'm very excited about.
Cool.
So hopefully more in the near future.
Awesome.
Cool.
That's awesome, man. Hey, thank you for letting us be your first podcast ever, by the way.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I can't wait to.
Yes.
I appreciate it, guys.
No
Thanks
problem.
a lot.
And thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and have a great night.